This episode is for every man that has silently struggled behind the mask of success. Dr. Arvind Petrie is pulling back the veil. Dr. Petrie is a father of three, a dentist who has faced divorce, cancer, and suicidal thoughts. So welcome, Dr. Petrie. Not only you're a dentist, father, you're a friend. I've known you for, I was trying to calculate on the way over here, 7 years that we've known each other. You've also been a wonderful friend to my late husband. And I still remember very vividly calling you when I announced the terrible, awful news that my husband had died by suicide and how you had shared your struggles. And you have stood by my side. It's been 3 years now. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your support throughout my journey. And I'm so honored that you're ready to share your story now.
Yeah, well, you've given some gifts, Melissa, to your story, your struggle, the traumas that came from Scott's passing and what's happened from that. But you've turned that into purpose. And that's been highly enjoyable to watch from the outside, from my perspective, and even my spouse's. And we salute you, we support you, and we're here for a reason. And I
Yes.
remember that. I remember meeting you in DC in 2017.
Yeah, that's that what it was. Yeah, that was
Yeah,
fun.
that
And then
was,
there was
that was
Bahamas. I remember Bahamas too. That
yeah,
was a lot of
a lot
good
of life lived
memories.
in the last 7 years, but and
Yes,
a lot of life left to live.
absolutely. Well, I'd love to start by the beginning, kind of your childhood, and also, have you always wanted to be a dentist, or was that something that was expected of you?
You know, upbringing is always interesting, especially when you come from Middle Eastern or Eastern parents. My dad is born here, he's passed on some years back. Mother's from India. So growing up, us three boys, there was a lot of expectation. And I don't want to put it necessarily expectation, but indoctrination of, hey, there's going to be a level of success that is expected. And as we always joke in the Indian culture, you're going to be the engineer, you're going to be the doctor, or you're going to be the attorney. I think there's a subliminal fourth if you're going to go into finance. I heard that's acceptable now too in modern culture. And to that regard, my dad was an engineer, my brothers are engineer, and I became a physician through my own right. But growing up, the I would actually I would actually give my mother most credit for why I wanted to be a dentist, and it was from an early age. I mean, I've got pictures back from probably second grade, so whatever age, we're about 10 years old, of drawing pictures of my office. And at least I was smart enough to know I like cars, and I had a red Ferrari, though I ended up getting a red truck, not the red Ferrari, but I got the Ford. But I had these things since a very, very young age. So since about 10 that I knew that I wanted to, and I pursued this career into dentistry, especially, not just medicine, but dentistry.
And then, once you became a dentist, can you kind of tell us your story? I know you had dealt with, cancer and divorce.
You
Just can you?
know, yeah, I'll go into all of that because my story is interesting. I don't necessarily know that I would wish the same path that I took on others, because every single mistake I can think of, or hardship along the way, I feel like I've experienced to some degree, whether that's by my own choosing or just by the default and necessities of life. But I'm coming up here. I'll be 42 this July, celebrating my birthday. I went to University of Pittsburgh Dental School. I applied throughout the country. I had a lot of acceptances in the East Coast. I spent 4 wonderful years out Pitt. Have a lot of great memories there, great friendships, great curriculum, and good feedback coming out of that education. I came back home, pursued a residency in Spokane, Washington. That's where Gonzaga, my eldest daughter, we go into school here in the fall time. And for a while, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, because you always think about specialty. I mean, there's a lot of stress to get into dental school just by its default. The fact that you're in a competitive program, and your entire education from when you're young to when you're into your teenage and your young adolescence, I mean, it's competition. And that's something that is indoctrinated in you. And I think it stays a lot of docs, is there's a constant like fear of comparison. There's this edgy culture where you're just always trying to get ahead. And going through that, I don't necessarily know that I had the best undergrad experience because there was always that fear, am I good enough? Am I going to, get accepted? Am I going to make it to the universities? And I had some denials from some universities I really wanted to get into, and that really hits the ego. But I had acceptances. I went to Pitt, came back home, went to Spokane. It was during those residency that I started to realize I had a really good didactic with children. I worked with some of the kids through the program. I was very good at it. I applied to residency. I was accepted to head actually back to Pittsburgh to do pediatrics there. And I rescinded that residency application and offer a couple of months before I was set to move my family back at the time. Um, then I started working in private practice. I had a great associate position. I was running a satellite office by myself a year and a half out of school, which I think was a lot at the time. I don't think we understand where we're at in our careers and what we're capable of, what we're not capable of. And I look back now, I was thinking, man, I was 27 years old, thrown into a private practice with no oversight and hell, no real education on business, on some of the leadership aspects of running a small team, all these things with business ownership that we don't have enough training on in dental school. And that's not to fault or blame the university system. There's a lot of didactic, there's a lot of information that has to be stuffed within a short period of time. So it's kind of an all-you-can-eat buffet, and your plates are coming, and you're trying to take little bits as much as you can before it clears down that conveyor belt. So that was a great experience. And at the time, my previous spouse was not happy where we were at, and there was some early struggles in marriage and the family that led me to start looking for a practice back in Western Washington, where I'm originally from. And I linked up with a doctor. This is 2013, so just 2.5 years out of my graduation. And at 29 years old, I bought my first practice. And I actually bought a practice before I ever bought a home. And that same month, I bought a home, moved the whole family over, and it was just a lot over a little amount of time. And that to me was awesome. I was feeling on top of the world. I'm like, here I am. I'm 29 years old. I'm a shotgunner. I'm a gunner. I'm good at my relationships. Not sure I know anything about dentistry yet, but I'm really good at relationships. And hopped into a very, very established practice that was actually a sinking ship. And that was something that I wouldn't wish upon my younger self and other docs because I didn't have any oversight. There was nobody telling me, hey, Petrie, hey, Arvind, maybe you don't want to buy this practice for these reasons. Maybe you shouldn't do this for these reasons. Maybe you should do this for these reasons. And I blindly stepped in, going off the advice of the brokers, consultants that I was using, and stepped in my first practice. Things were great, as least I thought. And then 2 months into my first position, my first year, I was bankrupt. And we were negative cash flow. We weren't making any money. And I thought, man, what have I done to go within 3 months from having a great position, making good money, having a good life, to I don't know how to pay my bills. I don't know how to pay my team members. I don't even know how to pay the rent next month. I mean, it's a lot of stuff on honestly a 30-year-old young man, and at this point with two children.
I don't think a lot of people realize that with dentistry, especially in the early times, that they could be struggling. They could have the big office, but just the overhead and your student loans, and you said you just had moved, bought a house, that alone, it was just too much.
Life was happening super, super fast. And, the benefit and the blessing of today's younger doctors and physicians is there's a good amount of community out there, right? Social media wasn't necessarily a big thing when I came out. Yeah, we had some Facebook. I don't think Instagram was around, but we didn't necessarily have these support groups. There was coaching, there was professional groups out there within reach, but there wasn't a lot of communication. There wasn't a lot of community. So I kind of felt like I was on an island by myself. I didn't have anybody necessarily to turn to. I didn't have anybody in family in business. I had nobody in dentistry in business. I was the only one in my circle, a friend group that bought a practice so quick out of school. So my advice circle, my counsel was very small. And that is something that I wish I didn't have. But at the same time, it pushed me into figuring shit out, to be honest. I made a lot of mistakes, picked up associate jobs, and the one thing that I could do was I could work. And I bless my dad for this because he was a hard worker. So he gave me that mindset that end of the day, a man works. And as much as that's a blessing, it's also kind of a curse, right? Because we work and we work and we work, but that comes at a cost, which obviously came at a cost to me.
Yeah.
So I got a couple positions on the side. I worked through that. It took about 2 years to really get the practice right, to where we were cash flowing positive. I was actually starting to understand what overhead meant. I mean, that's a key term that I had no freaking idea what overhead was from a business perspective. I just looked at the old numbers, the old doc, and said, okay, that looks like good money. If I come on, that's exactly what's going to happen. But that's not what happened, because now you have insurance write-off. I went from a fee-for-service practice to a heavy PPO practice. So all the profits were cut off by signing that contract with the various insurance companies. But like I said, this isn't coming from a place of complaining, but a place of understanding, like, what were the steps that I had gone through. But after 2 years and grinding hard, doing 5, 6 days a week, we started to get to a place of stability and some more income, and started building branding. And then of January 2015 was when I'd gone in for some pain in my abdomen, and met with the urologist, took a quick, not a CAT scan, but what they do with the ultrasound. Yeah, to
Ultrasound,
see the
yeah.
babies. Took an ultrasound, 10-second examination, and kind of sat up and said, "Okay, Arvind, well, I got an opening tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the surgery bay. We'll get you in, and we'll get the cancer removed, and we'll talk about post-operative and any chemo, radiation will be needed." And I was like, Frank Kim, my urologist. I'm like, hold on a second. What? Cancer? Not what I was prepared for. I thought we were going to talk about a hernia, maybe something like that, or too much stress. So it was a lot to go on in those first couple of years here, and it was tough. I'm not going to lie.
Because in those 2 years that you were grinding the 5, 6 days a week, and you said a young family at the same time, so you probably didn't have a lot of time to take care of you on top
No,
of that.
I had a practice. I had 2 mortgages. I had people that relied on me. I had a team that relied on me.
And
You know,
leading up to that, now that if you go back to those times before your diagnosis, were there little whispers that you can remember to like slow down, or to things were starting to ache, or little signs?
not just yet, but also I wasn't looking for the signs of the breadcrumbs.
Yeah.
I wasn't looking to see, hey, I'm coming home on the weekend and I'm checking out, right? I'm not present with my family. I'm drinking. I'm watching movies. I'm sedating, whatever that may look like. Like, I don't realize that was just a, hey, now I've had a hard work week. I need to get some time for myself. I did know I started taking a lot of baths, and that's
Yeah.
still like my way of like coming down and like separating out.
Yeah.
Um,
So
but
you
that
said
was,
were you coming home and then just checking out on
yeah,
the, yeah.
not just checking out, but just coming home and being angry.
Mm,
I think you know a little bit about that.
just overwhelmed. Yeah.
Yeah, because we have so many energy units, or so many F's to give for the day, and then we start borrowing from our internal backup store,
Yeah.
and that comes at a cost too. But again, I was too young and honestly too immature to understand what that meant and to realize that.
Yeah.
But the signs were probably there, and it wasn't to slow down. I mean, all I knew was, hey, if you've got so much stuff to do in so many hours, you just grind.
You
I
just
mean,
grind because you're young, right? See, I think a lot of people that are young, they're like maybe late 20s, and they're like, well, I'm young, I can grind. I know Scott did that, graduated 26, and he's 6 days a week for I don't know how many years. He's like, well, I could just grind. But the same thing kind of happens, you have nothing else to give. And I'm sure at the time, your ex-wife, she was kind of noticing that you're not present and things like that. And like if a wife is listening right now and they're seeing their husband kind of grinding like that, is there a message that you could tell them that could be helpful so the husband could see that he needs to slow down? Like it,
this is a different context. But the song "Stand by Your Man"?
pardon, can you repeat that?
There's a song, "Stand by Your Man." It's a classic 60-year-old country song.
Okay.
Now, it's a different context, but that is something I would tell for the wives or the supporting partners, is like, stand by your man. Give him something, even when he doesn't necessarily deserve it, but he needs that support.
Yeah. But is there a way that we can, provide them where the slowing down, because that's just was obviously too much for you to work the 6 days a week and the grinding. at that point, was there anything that could have changed your mind to slow down or to notice that this would be not sustainable?
Well, I think just helping support individuals and find out how do they need that support.
Hmm.
Do they need support from time, from better nutrition? Do they need support physically? Like, can I come do certain things? Do I need support taking care of the home, children, other responsibilities? What can I do to offload your burden?
Mm, yeah.
Because
Yeah.
men are taught from a historical standpoint, just take the shit. It's your problem.
Yeah, like the Superman, I know for Scott was the same thing. Like, oh, I've got it. I'm just a little overwhelmed, but I've got it. Was often kind of yeah,
Well,
wouldn't.
because sometimes, I mean, I don't want to say it's an addiction, but you, at least for me, and I'll speak on my behalf, even though I think this is common with a lot of the male archetypes that I align with, was there's this like badge of honor that like nobody can outwork me, and I can just grind harder. And it's like, okay, let's see what much I can do. But again, you're pulling from other parts of you that are being neglected.
Yeah.
And there's a dark side to that because you can only pull so much energy and it has to come be fulfilled by other ways.
Hmm.
And I think that's where the dichotomy comes into place for a lot of men that give too much and now they are incomplete. They are lacking. And they're going to find ways to either cover it, sedate it, stuff it down, or wait for that violent emotional eruption.
Yeah. So when you got your diagnosis and then how long were you doing chemo treatments for? Did that change your point of view of the grinding when you went back to work after that?
There was, I think, when I got my diagnosis, it's interesting because obviously I was scared. I'm 31 years old and I've got cancer and I don't know what that means, right? I was stage two. So early enough and I caught it. And good lesson there was, hey, my body was telling me something was off. And it took me 4 months. I went in and finally said, hey, it doesn't feel right. Let's check it out. Um, but it's not the lesson that I needed to slow down. It was more this feeling of like anger, like why me? And anger that I don't have the ability not to work. I'm the only income earner in the family. I've got debts and responsibility, and I have an integrity in the sense that I always pay my debts. I don't short people money. I pay my bills. That's something I was raised like. You got to pay your bills. If you don't pay your bills, you're a piece of what. So coming from that, it wasn't necessarily sadness. It was just like, shit, I can't take time off. And I was angry about that because I'm angry in the sense that I couldn't care for myself. I essentially took about a week off from work because I had to. I had surgery. I was in physical pain. I couldn't necessarily do my ops. I had some great support by my oral surgeon and the doctors around me to at least take over some of the emergent care I couldn't do. But going through the chemotherapy, which I did for about 2 months, I did 2 rounds, which was recommended by the oncology team. I worked through the chemo rounds. I would do my chemo on Thursday, and then I would have actually no, I did my chemo on Friday because I was still 5 days a week then.
Wow.
And then I'd have the weekend to kind of recover here a little bit, which is sort of like false omen because they inject you with some steroids during your chemotherapy. So on your infusion days, you feel pretty good.
Oh, wow.
The morning after, you feel like you just got back from a terrible rave and got drugged. And those are rough weekends. And I remember vivid times, especially during the early part of the weeks after the chemo rounds and going into work, and I was vomiting between patients. I kind of would have to excuse myself when I got to a certain degree, but I worked between them. I didn't tell people about it. And the team was very supportive at the time. But I brought back on essentially a full schedule and worked through it.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I mean, that's sad that you felt like there was no other way. You're like, well,
You know,
nobody else can, pay the bills. I have to work. And so you couldn't take that time to truly heal, that your body needed the rest. And I think a lot of men feel that pressure. I know Scott felt that when he was 1 month, where he couldn't work because of his back. And that was really scary for him. He did have associate at that time, but still, it is very scary. And I know a lot of men, go through that as well. And then they think they're going to lose everything. And so tell me after, I know you had shared your story with suicide ideation. Did that come afterwards, after your diagnosis, or what's the timeline?
No, those, that ended up coming from my personal experience. So um, later on during my career, I was married in 2010, and about 2017, I was starting to really have some struggles in my personal marriage. This is a deeper conversation I think that we'll have time for, but there were some major struggles and feeling lack of support in many ways. And at a core issue was a real lack of respect. And I think that was probably the nail in the coffin in terms of why I exited my marriage. And that happened in 2020. It was the same time when COVID had kind of struck and hit, and things had been really bad the year prior. We had the birth of our third child, my son, in 2018, which was a wonderful blessing, but there was definitely some recourse afterwards here, a lot of disconnection as a couple. And going through that time, there was a lot of loneliness that was starting to be experienced by myself. And I think when you're in a box in life, you don't necessarily see where you're at. And it actually took some friends on the outside through like social posts and whatnot and would make comments and say, hey, Arvind, you ever notice that you're always with your kids or you're always alone? And there's reasons behind that. And I'm not here to talk negative on my ex-spouse or anything of that nature, but that was something that I had started to realize. Yeah, I feel pretty alone. I mean, this is a reason why in a lot of marriages end in whatever reasons was there's a certain level of loneliness or detachment or lack of unity and connection together. And there's definitely a disconnection. And I didn't understand what was happening necessarily why. And this in 2019 was a time frame that things really started to take a twist. And we were going through a lot of the time. We had a new child. I was in the process of, I had bought another practice and merged it in. Business was going really well now and very busy. Building a new home, making a move, and we were without residence between the new build and the old home for several months. So bouncing around between VRBOs, rentals. We crouch cash essentially on friends of ours' home for almost 3 or 4 months with a newborn. So there was a lot of anger around that and just hostility and uncomfortability. And that really spiraled down until the end of 2019. We moved into our new home and we were pretty disconnected. And I didn't know what was going on, but I felt some things in my heart. And I'd gotten to a place where just, when you're in and you've been here, Mel, when you're in a relationship and you're disconnected from your partner, you start asking, what is it wrong with me? We start putting the blame on ourselves. I think a lot of people do. If you're truly a narcissistic person, you're going to blame the other, say, well, this isn't me, it's you. Right. So for me, there was a lot of self-internal reflection, like how messed up am I? And you start to feel really alone. And this goes back to, earlier in my life, my story, when I felt alone in the practice and the business and not knowing what to do. And that's where I was. And you try to numb it, you try to stuff it down. Men do this, women do this, everybody does it in whatever way it looks like, disconnect, check out. And I think with the idealization of, suicide, something that starts to become attractive, at least to me, was I don't want to feel this way anymore. How can I really truly turn this off? And that can be end of life, taking of life. And for me, it got to a very, very low point where I attempted it.
And then for that point, I just feel it's so sad because you feel like that's the only way out, to not feel that pain, even though, you have your 3 beautiful children. But that's why it's so hard to understand for people. But you explain it. You're kind of in this prison, and, your thoughts are spiraling and you're just seeing that there's just an immense amount of pain and loneliness, and you don't want to feel that anymore.
Yeah. For me, I was tired. I was tired physically. I was tired of.
Did
I
you
was
do you
emotionally
feel
tired.
did you have friends like notice that at all, or were you did you discuss those suicidal thoughts with anybody else close to
No,
you? No.
no.
See, this is where I think a lot of men definitely hide behind that mask, like they don't talk about the internal pain and struggles and the suicidal thoughts. until it's too late. I can definitely relate to that. I mean, I know you had mentioned you had talked to my husband, I think a month before or a month or two before he passed, because you could tell he was, struggling losing his dad and whatnot. And you were kind of hoping to connect with him and show him that there's so much love around him, so much to live for.
I think it's tough because there's not a playbook for this, right? We don't go through basic health in ninth grade and learn about anatomy, physiology, health, and say, oh yeah, by the way, let's talk about suicide.
Yeah.
A lot of times too, you're like, that's not in my world. That's not for me, right? And as guys, and my best friend came to me and was just, at least at that point, was like, yeah, by the way, I almost off myself Friday. I wouldn't know what to do with that.
Yeah.
Obviously I'd care, I'd be concerned, but like, as far as a recipe, an answer, a tool, I wouldn't have known what to say. Besides, you should, talk to somebody and probe. But I don't have an answer to that question. And I think that's probably why people don't bring it up. It's why I certainly did bring it up, not to mention the shame around it. Like, look at this perfect life, not perfect life, but boats, cars, house, kids, all of it. And you want to cash that in. I mean, there's a lot of shame that goes around that. At least I felt shame.
And have you been able to work through that shame since then, or do you still hold on to that?
Yeah, I still hold on to a little bit. It's a process, right?
Yeah.
It's a process that I don't think you ever arrive at. Just like the thoughts, and I've talked off camera with this. Like, there's always that little nuance and attraction and perseverance of it just beneath the surface sometimes.
And how did you move past actually going through with it, with suicide? Like you said, you didn't reach out for help, you didn't tell anybody. So can you tell me what made you change your mind and you chose to live?
Several things, but I did one old play that I knew was I got to work. I knew that, but I got to work differently. I started to read. I started to learn. I started to understand. I saw counselors. I saw therapists. I joined men's groups. I started a men's coach. And above it all, I got the word.
So you seeked help for yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I'm so proud. I'm so proud that you did. And I know you're still working, on yourself. And I know you've been a big voice on social media, sharing your struggles still now and having that voice. I know you're inspiring other men to do the same and removing that veil and that shame, that, yeah, you're successful. You have all the things that many wish they can have, but it's okay to still feel all that darkness, that pain. I think a lot of times, they have a hard time saying that they're struggling because they look at others and say, well, I have all these things, I shouldn't be struggling. But I think more successful men are, and they feel alone. And now, tell me some of the things that you've incorporated in a daily basis to just keep those thoughts at bay, or for your own mental health, your own growth at this point.
A part of it's gratitude. Just reframing how I look at life. Not looking at the lack. Working through, some of the coaching I've had done and understanding that, we're given everything we need. It's already pre-programmed. But the work is in accessing it and sharing it. We talk about darkness and light side and shadow work. Once you've lit your light, as you know, Mel, there's going to be illumination on others. And through my own experience, through divorce or health scares or whatnot, I mean, I can't tell how many people have reached out in private.
Yes,
it happens all the time.
Yeah, it's always like even driving here to podcasts, it's God's work. I always say, because it's just sharing a story, and I know it'll impact so many, especially men that are kind of behind that veil and not sharing that they're struggling. And maybe you will, I know you will nudge someone to maybe either start seeking help themselves or telling a friend or finding community. We live in an era now, it is a little bit more, accessible and talked about, especially for men, where they don't have to pretend to be so strong for their family, and I'm so proud that you've done that for yourself and your family. And if you can explain a little bit, kind of, now I know you've got, a dentist, but are you thinking of helping other men along the way? Like, what's on your heart lately? I know you've been sharing a lot about
No,
your journey.
100%. I love helping others. Whether it's young docs, men's work. It's hard to, women, same thing, but it's a little bit different when it comes from men's coaching. I have a huge passion in health and wellness now, and my partner Jamie is awesome in being a supportive role in that. And you asked part about the healing. Well, part of that is having a kick-ass partner. And I
Yes.
like hit the jackpot.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Jamie is
Arvid,
incredible, and congratulations. I know your wedding is coming soon in September. So, yeah, she is. And for her passion has been to help men that are fatherless, right? That
yeah,
grew up fatherless, and that wound. And that really touched my heart because that's my son, right? And that's going to be a wound and that he continually works on. I can never be that masculine energy for him, that figure. But I know, he'll have plenty of mentors along the way, friends, family that will be that part of him. But it'll be important to still, work and guide him through that. So I love that Jamie is working alongside with a lot of men that are fatherless.
well, women weren't designed for that. you know and there's I think there's a huge lacking in healthy masculinity now in our society, especially in this country. And I see it more so now that I've gotten to the work and started to see it and understand it and what those impacts could or couldn't be. But I do hold the men accountable, because at the end of the day it comes down to a choice. It is your choice what you're going to do, nobody else's. And it has to be the responsibility of the individual to make that decision, that choice, and that change. I
Yes.
chose that for myself, coming from a place of passion and trauma and other ways, but knowing that I can't be victim to that circumstance. And I understand that now, because it's all about a mindset change. But you have to do the work.
Yeah.
That's the big exception.
Oh,
Your
yeah.
job as a mother is not to be the father. We need healthy men. We need men to heal.
Hmm.
We need men to step up as leaders and to do that work and understand that there's a difference in the polarity between us and the women.
Hmm.
And strong male leadership is something that I think is very much needed in the family. And there's an effect when it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think for men, once they kind of share that veil and speak their truth without shame, then there's so much freedom and happiness that can happen. Look at you where you're at now, and about to get remarried, and your practice is successful, and you're going to be, working with men and sharing your stories, already impacting so many. And I know it will continue to do so. I I know I kind of mentioned that before, but if, men will be listening right now, men that might be going through divorce, suicidal thoughts, and just struggling with a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
identity, right? If they're losing their identity, their practice is not doing well, or they're changing professions. I think you
Yep.
kind of mentioned it a little bit, but what would be a message that you speaking to them right now? What would be that hope that inspire them to work on themselves?
At the core, the main message is that on the other side of that door is a world of possibilities. The problem is that we can't see past the door unless we open it. We walk through it. We change the frame on how we see our lives. We do the work, and we get rid of self-limiting beliefs.
Yes.
Because
Amen.
it comes down to the facet that we are in control of our own lives. Pick it through divine intervention, environment, doesn't matter. But you have a life. You have a soul, and you have a choice. So It comes down to you deciding what do you want for your life? What do you want for you? And stepping into that power and utilizing resources in order to embrace it. Whether that's the church, your friendships, your own children, your family, your groups, but getting in that community and letting go and fear. But
Hmm.
that's the gift. And that was, and again, I'm speaking from my past and my decisions, because once I decided to make that change, that's when the abundancy started to come in, like what's possible.
Yeah.
And now I got a taste of something different. And now that almost became a good, healthy addiction, because now it says, hey, what is actually possible? And that will excite you more than anything else when you start to realize like there is another outcome. There is a potential outcome I had not seen before. There are things that I now tell myself I never told myself before. And that leads to places of just power. And you asked a question earlier about next phase of life. Well, that's part of a purpose
Hmm.
where I feel called to do more than just the clinical dentistry. And I feel powerfully positioned to do so.
Yeah.
There's always a sense of fear, because fear at the end is the driver of not doing something or doing something that, and there is still fear, like, can I do this? Is this what I'm supposed to do? If I step away from something that is very productive, I'm good at, and go into another field, what does that mean?
Mm.
And then the same message I tell everybody is like, fuck fear. You got one life to live.
Yes.
Live it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like a lot of dentists, if they decided, oh, they feel kind of stuck, if they don't want to do that anymore, that first step of stepping away, something that's so secure, they
Sure.
have it, but that something else is calling them, taking that first step. But what I've seen for myself, other people, when you're following that purpose, that abundance will come, and you'll be so ignited with that fire because it's your purpose. And there's so much joy when that comes, when
Yeah.
you're in alignment. And so I love that you shared that. And I'm
And
excited for you.
here's the dirty little secret about it. You might actually have fun again.
Yes, I
Lord
know.
knows I will be having fun for a while.
Yes.
And that's like,
Actually,
this is fun.
that was I had a New Year's resolution. It was 2024. And I was like, okay, it had been 2 years since my husband passed. I'm like, okay, I'm going to allow myself to have fun again, because there was kind of a bit of that guilt, and we kind of forget as adults to have fun. And our kids are great reminders to just come and play. How often our kids say, come play with me?
Hmm.
And to allow to be creative and playful, like, now I'm like, oh, I love dancing, like, go do that, and enjoy, the nature and outdoors. And so, yeah, go have fun again. I like that.
Yeah. Life, we have fiduciary responsibilities, and as the male archetype and leader, there's a lot of responsibilities that we carry. It's lots centered around the production and the provision and the money and whatnot. But some has to be centered around the aspect of joy, right? And I'm in a season now where I understand that, like, I'm looking to recreate more joy and more peace in my life because it was way too chaotic.
Yeah.
And young men, young entrepreneurs, even young women, it doesn't matter. Like, there's a lot that is caught up in that grind that we're not slowing down and realizing that we're missing out on life. We're missing
Yes.
out on joy. Children aren't easy. God knows I got teenage girls and I want to strangle them half the time. No, I
Yeah.
love them.
I've got an 11-year-old that's pretty much going into 16. So I know how you feel.
That's a tough one. There's no playbook on it.
No.
But I know as their dad,
Mhm.
I'm in their life,
Yeah.
and I'm going to raise them right, and I'm going to be a huge instrument in the role that they play in terms how they grow up, who they marry, how they show up as a spouse and a partner,
Yeah,
and all of
you're guiding a legacy, They're going to look up to you and see what you've done and the work that you've done for yourself, and they're going to want to meet a spouse that have done the same, have done some work and emotional intelligence, and so that's so important that you're leaving that legacy for your kids, and it's hard to find that balance though, right? But we all need that harmony, that balance. I see it now, being a single mom. finding that balance, even though my drive for my career, but still be so present and be on top of all the bills and all the things. Like, it's overwhelming, but I still make time for fun and for self-care, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh yes.
Absolutely. That's why sometimes the weekends I'm like, oh, I check out, you know?
And I take my baths, my sauna, my red light.
Yes. Oh
I
gosh. Red light. I did red light before I come here. I do that on a regular basis. I sauna almost every night. I put the kids to bed and I sauna. So yeah, just adding those little, this morning I did my meditation with my son, and my daughter sleeps
Listen,
until 10. So she wasn't up to do that. But yeah,
I think
all
it's
those little
a
things really help because like you said, fear will always creep in, shame, guilt. And to keep those at bay, we have to continuously do the work.
that's you hit it on the head there, because that, like I said, that dark is always within us. It's a dichotomy in each individual. It's who do you choose to feed? Because part of what you mentioned was work, and it is work. But here's the change: like, the work is good. It's not supposed to always be easy. And I truly feel if you accept that role, if you accept these roles in our lives, and the work that comes along with it, as strenuous it is a gift. And stop looking at it as a curse or a burden.
Yes.
A lot of the work is a gift, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, say thank you, right? Thank you. I actually one
Yes.
thing too, I was told, okay, say thank you to all these bills. Thank you. Thank you. I've got to pay these bills, and thank you.
Maybe not thank you the late fees. 'Cause I'm like, what? I forgot that one. My credit card expired. SOB.
Oh, really trying. Well, how can people find you? Because I always love your posts as you share your heart, and I know you touch a lot of people. And so, how they can find you?
I'm on socials. You'll see me on Facebook, Instagram, business page at Best Dentist Tacoma, and then my personal and my my main platform at Dr. Arvind Petrie.
Yes.
You'll see me on Instagram as well too, and come connect. Send me a DM, send me a message. I'd love to share more. I'd love to hear your story. I
Yeah.
think one of the greatest gifts in life is the exchange of information and our communication and who we meet along the way. And the late Anthony Bourdain, I think, hit this on the nail in his life and his expeditions that he was doing. And if you get a chance to read some of his stuff and see his biography, Troubled Soul,
Yeah.
but he got it. He really understood the human connection aspect. And that is something that I love,
Yeah.
and meeting people where they're at.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I love getting to know people, their stories, and uh, yeah, no more surface talk. I want to dig into their story and their struggles and see where they're at. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on and share your story. And again, thank you for your friendship and for being there for me and my family. And I know you
Always
were
with
there
you.
for Scott as well, and he loved you.
Yeah, well, I loved him too. And he taught me some great things about endo I did not know. And I always loved Scott for that, because no matter where he was at, if you needed a hand or some help, that man would give it.
Yeah, he was the most generous man. Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
well, thank you for having me on.
What did you say?
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, yes. You're welcome.